This is episode 24 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, our guest is Dara Hoffman-Fox, a licensed professional counselor and published author who works with transgender, gender nonconforming, and gender questioning individuals. Part of the mission of the Women in Depth podcast is to talk about things that are hidden, feared, misunderstood, beneath the surface, and really bringing light to these areas in our experience. And so I felt that exploring the area of transgender was appropriate because this is an area that a lot of people don't fully understand. So without any further ado, let's get started with the interview. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, our guest is Dara Hoffman-Fox. Dara is a licensed professional counselor and gender therapist in private practice. She frequently serves as a resource on transgender issues for the media and is a prolific gender identity thought leader whose articles and videos have empowered thousands worldwide. She provides educational resources through a blog at darahoffmanfox.com, YouTube channel, social media networks, trainings, and presentations, and her first publication, You and Your Gender Identity, A Guide to Discovery. Hi, Dara, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lourdes. Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation because it is our do-over because of technical computer stuff issues before. So thank you so much for taking the time again to come onto the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a good excuse for us to talk a second time because I enjoyed our first time as well.
Dara, can you share a little bit more about yourself with our listeners?
I'd be glad to. So, as you mentioned in my introduction, I am a licensed professional counselor. I am a gender therapist, which means that I specialize in working with those who are transgender, who are gender questioning. And so I want to kind of start with where I'm at right now, and then I can perhaps back up a little bit to explain how it is I got to where I am. Currently, I would say that I have a mission, and it really is to be able to create and help create a world that is going to be more welcoming to those who are transgender. And underneath that, there's different ways that I do that, obviously through being a counselor in my private practice, working with individuals and couples. But about 3 years ago, I realized that I wanted to be able to expand it beyond just the four walls of my office to be able to help on a much larger scale, because my passion was growing when it came to not only helping these individuals who are transgender or who are trying to figure out their gender, but there's a second piece to it. This world, this society needs to become a place where these people can then safely be able to be who they are. And so there's two different sides to my work where I am helping people who are struggling with their gender identity, help them figure that out. But then at the same time, I have to make sure that this is a world where they can actually be able to be that authentic self. And so underneath that umbrella in which what it is that I do, then besides being a counselor, I have expanded over the last 3 years to have a more, I guess because of the internet, it's an international presence through my blog, through a YouTube channel, through a Facebook page. You mentioned that I just published a book. I also do public speaking, trainings and workshops, and doing interviews like this, for instance. I think this has been one of my favorite parts of it because I know specifically that your audience is receptive. And that's a big part of my goal right now is when I try to educate the general public, I have to be very intentional about who is it that I'm trying to talk to about this. And from what I've listened to with your podcast, I can tell your audience is compassionate and ready to receive the information that I want to share.
And I guess, just thinking about what you're saying about, part of your work is helping the world become a safer place where those who are exploring their gender identity can actually do that and be supported and just be able to be who they are.
Yes, that's precisely the goal. And so that's why I was so appreciative that you reached out to me for me to be able to talk to what, like I said, I consider the general public, but I know I have the privilege of talking to a unique audience right now who's going to be able to absorb this.
Thanks, Dara. I just feel like this is an area that is more common than a lot of people maybe want to admit to. And I feel that it really does touch most lives. I think a lot of people may not be aware of it, or they just think it's on the periphery, but really this is part of everyone's life. And so I wanted to have this conversation because I know it's for many an uncomfortable conversation to have. And I know also that there are a lot of assumptions, fears, misperceptions about this topic. So thank you for being here to start to maybe demystify some of this. That's exactly what's going on. Like you said, more and more people are starting to be affected by this, whether it's themselves or people in their lives. And I guarantee it's only going to continue to increase because visibility is increasing and information and education, which means that more children are going to start speaking up, more teenagers and more adults are going to be able to start coming out. So, Dara, this is a good segue, I guess, into the next question, which is, why is this area so important and why does it matter?
So, the way I see it is when it comes to other, let's say, social movements, civil rights movements that have happened, let's talk specifically about America for right now. There have been groups of people for decades who have been oppressed, and over time things are brought to light and these oppressed groups are able more and more to be seen, to be heard, and to be embraced. And so, looking back in time, we can look about this when it comes to equal rights for women, equal rights for African Americans, and moving into gay and lesbian rights. The more that we see our society begin to open up, in terms of equality for everyone, the better the society becomes. So it can be challenging because at first, there's the resistance to wanting to understand who is this group, what's up with them. And it could take, again, decades sometimes for that understanding to finally sink in. So I think right now, when it comes to people who are transgender, this is yet another layer of people in society who exist and who are wanting to be able to live their lives openly and to be able to do so in a way that's safe and supported and understood. And so I see it as yet just another step in terms of our society to become even greater when it comes to embracing more and more people who exist in it.
Dara, what are some of the, I guess, we hear a lot of words around this topic, and I think for most, we don't know what the words mean or we confuse them. And so could you explain what, just to begin with, what does it mean to be transgender? Maybe as part of this, also addressing gender nonconforming, gender questioning, and other words that are heard when discussing this area.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. So, there's the definition of transgender that a lot of people are aware of right now, and that's because there has been growing visibility of people and it's being reported in the news. And so the definition of transgender, meaning somebody who, I always start with the idea that everybody is assigned a gender at birth, and that gender is the same usually as their biological sex. And that is based on the appearance of the baby's genitalia. Sometimes they're assigned this gender before they're born if they have an ultrasound and you can see what that genitalia is. So this is where we have to start, because that right there is not accurate anymore. When somebody is told, oh, you have a boy because look at his genitalia, or you have a girl, look at her genitalia, we now know that that is not 100% accurate at all. And so that's where, as the child starts to grow older and they're experiencing their gender, they can go in many different directions besides the direction of that gender they were told they are when they were born. So someone who's transgender, the most general description I can give is that it's somebody who experiences discomfort with that assigned gender at birth. And the reason I give it in a very sort of general, vague way like that, because it allows for a spectrum of answers. It doesn't mean somebody has to feel 100% opposite of their assigned gender at birth. Some people do feel that way, but not everybody. In fact, a lot of people don't. But it's still, there's just enough discomfort where they have questions about whether or not they really are truly that assigned gender at birth. And so that's where the word transgender can sort of envelop that feeling of anybody who has a discomfort with their assigned gender at birth.
So it's almost like, and I don't know if I'm using the right word to describe this, it's almost as if that level of discomfort almost could be on a continuum.
That's right. That's right. A lot of times when I'm working with my clients, I will ask them to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10 so I can understand better where it is that they are feeling that discomfort. And that also explains to them that it's okay to have a level, you know, that isn't necessarily at a 10 or a 1. So that means that for somebody who is experiencing that sort of discomfort with their gender, where they hit maybe like a 5, you had asked about perhaps what does it mean when somebody is gender nonconforming or gender variant. That means that that person still falls under that category of not feeling comfortable with that assigned gender at birth, but it might not necessarily be to that intensity that of somebody who, for instance, will need to transition medically or transition socially.
I can see that just, because transgender falls on a continuum, that even for those who are gender questioning, it can be very confusing, which I think adds to the general feeling of, what is this? What's going on? Because everybody wants, a definite answer. Like, this is transgender. And it really sounds like there's not a one answer that's going to fit every situation, that there's really, it's almost like just making space in that continuum for different shades of experience.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I really appreciate the feedback that you're giving me about where is it that you're understanding what I'm saying, because this can be a very complicated topic. And I try really hard to remember, even though I've been working in this field for over 10 years, I need to remember that when it comes to the general public, we need to start at kind of a more basic introduction to this. And then I don't want to accidentally then overwhelm the audience with information that then speeds along too quickly. So going back to what you just said, that there is a continuum when it comes to how much intensity, how intense is that discomfort that someone experiences with their assigned gender at birth.
And this, I think, leads into the next question that I want to ask you, Dara, which is, what are some of the unique experiences or challenges that those who are questioning their gender or exploring it, what are some of those that they face?
I think one of the very first challenges that somebody experiences has to do with the fact that they have more than likely repressed the questions that they have about their gender identity. So one of my favorite quotes is from Carl Jung, and he says, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And so somebody who has questions about their gender, depending on how old they are, and what environment they grow up in, but more than likely they're already told very, very early on that if they're feeling different than their assigned gender at birth, that's not okay. And again, that can happen to varying degrees depending on where does this child exist and grow up. But that's the very first challenge right there, is that as they're getting older and exploring themselves and trying to figure out who they are, they're being told a variety of messages that, ooh, that thing about you, that's not okay. And they say, oh, okay. And then they repress it. So the first challenge is to even be able to teach somebody how to unrepress those feelings that they have had to stuff down inside.
I can see that would be a very tough first step, because I think, it'd be scary to unpack that stuff, because, first of all, now they have to deal with that realization for themselves, and then what this means going forward.
Exactly. There's usually a lot of fear behind that. It can be fear of rejection, fear of losing people in your life, fear of losing, even like a well-established career. So depending on how old somebody is, when they finally begin to unrepress this, a lot of times the older somebody is, the more they have to lose through this process. And so that is I would say the first challenge that I want to help people with, is to be able to process that fear, look at why they had to repress all of this. And, a lot of times, because they have repressed this, there can be a hatred towards themselves or being ashamed of it. That's a really intense emotion that then needs to be worked through.
Dara, are there any other unique experiences or challenges that are faced by these individuals?
Oh, certainly. So again, the reason that a big part of my mission is also to change this world in which people who are transgender exist in, is because there is a lot more understanding that needs to happen so that these individuals can be able to be themselves. And so, when it comes to the challenges, there are, let's say, first of all, when it comes to being able to medically be able to transition. So this is somebody whose discomfort is so intense that they do need to take the steps of hormone therapy or getting surgeries. It's still very difficult for some people to acquire those resources. Insurances are getting better about helping to cover for those, but it still can be very, very costly. And so that right there, it's as if the medicine that they need and the care that they need is unavailable to them. That can be a very painful experience to feel, because they then are aware that they are so uncomfortable in their bodies.
Wow. Yeah. I can see how this can lead to a lot of, or more of the mental health challenges of, depression, anxiety.
Yes. It's so intense. It's really hard to explain, for those who maybe haven't experienced this or haven't known somebody to go through this, that feeling of walking in the world and not only feeling out of place in your body, but out of place in the world, because on top of that, socially, you are not being seen for who you are. You're being called the gender pronoun that you really don't feel like you are inside. And sometimes I when I'm talking in general, like to the general public about this, I challenge them to think about how many times a day is it where you are referred to by your pronouns. So let's say you're a woman and you're referred to as she or her or ladies or ma'am. How many times do you make a decision during a day that's gendered? Which restroom do you go to? When you go to the gym, which changing room do you use? If you're at a concert and then the person singing says, ladies, your turn to sing. Now the guys sing. There's this constant influx of gendered language that happens. And so this is for somebody who's transgender and they haven't yet been able to reconcile that externally and internally, they're constantly being barraged by being not seen for who they really are.
And I wanted to mention, I think I mentioned this the first time around, that quote that you shared about being able to be who you are, and that's the greatest privilege. I completely agree with that, and I see that with, I think, just individuals in general. So even more so for those who are, experiencing this gender questioning process.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that's partially why I am so passionate about wanting to help them and then also help create a world that they can exist in. Because once I myself learned more about individuation and, another Carl Jung phrase,
Right.
and just how important that was for my own journey, and this might be helpful to know, like my personal connection for myself. I was 30 years old when I came out as gay, and even though it wasn't the exact same journey that somebody who's questioning their gender went through, I do remember having that feeling when I was a child of being attracted to girls. And, this was in the 80s, and I was an army brat, and I lived in the South. Like, there was there was nothing. There's no internet. There's nobody around to tell me, hey, this is what's going on. You're cool, kid. So it was something that I repressed, and then it kept bubbling up and bubbling up. And, it was a very painful process to have to face that realization, because by then I had made decisions like getting married to a man and having a child. And so having to then back up and realize, wait, that's not really who I am. Now there's going to have to be some difficult changes in my life because of this. I really can empathize with those who are having to make those changes, but I also can understand how amazing it can feel to finally be able to reconcile that and be who you are authentically.
Dara, what would you say are some of the myths, fears, or misperceptions that are commonly held in regards to transgender?
I think one of the ones that is most troubling to me is how sometimes people think that somebody who is transgender just wants to be the other gender. So, and I'll hear sometimes people saying this where, and this is usually maybe like a politician or somebody else who says, well, just because Joe wakes up one morning and decides he wants to be Jane doesn't mean that we should then let him use the women's bathroom. That is so not what happens for somebody who's transgender. And that's what I so much wish every time I hear somebody say that, I could just say, wait, can we have coffee? I want to talk to you about this. I need to, because I feel like if they can really understand what's happening, then they would then have much more empathy for what they go through. Because the people I work with, a lot of times their response is, do you think I really want to have to go through this? Do you think I want to have to pay all this money for surgery or for hormones and have to deal with society, scrutinizing me and judging me? And, this is not something you just wake up one day and say, hey, I think that looks like fun. I'm going to give that a shot. And so wanting to make sure that people understand, the best way to think of it is that somebody who's transgender, like their brain, and however you want to look, it could be their brain, their heart, their soul, is not the gender that they were assigned at birth. And so inside, that's how they feel, but nobody knows that on the outside. And it's very scary, and it's very painful at times for people to have to figure this out and then bring it out in the open. And so that's one of the biggest myths I want to clear up, is that this isn't something that somebody chooses. Somebody does then have to go through the process of choosing whether or not to do something about the fact that they are transgender. But the fact that just being transgender is not something that's a choice.
Yeah, and when you think too that in general, human beings, we try to avoid pain, and we
Yes.
generally move away from pain. And I would say that numbing ourselves from pain and escaping pain is kind of something that we do as a society and as individuals, try to move away from suffering. And so it really doesn't make sense that, someone would choose this.
Right. And I think that's a really great point to make, because the pain part comes from them having to live a lot of times what feels like a lie or like a false self. And that point in which they have to make a decision, should I do something about this or not? It usually comes after they've really tried to fight it and really have repressed it. For instance, quite a few of my clients they joined, let's say, the military, and they've done what people would call hyper-masculinizing. Inside they feel like they keep feeling like they're a woman, but they're like, maybe this will go away if I join the Navy SEALs. Maybe this will go away if I, become a combat veteran, and they go do this really, macho guy stuff. And then they end up coming back and having PTSD from being in these situations and still feeling like they're a woman. So there's so much that people go through to try to fight this.
And you just reminded me when you gave that example, Dara, in our first interview, and I was hoping you could speak on this again, you had mentioned that there are some unique differences in challenging experiences between male to female versus female to male. Could you share that again?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm glad you brought that up. Because I think a lot of times in the general public, what everyone has seen so far mostly are those who have transitioned from male to female. So that really is the experience that people are starting to get to know and understand. And so there's some of the challenges, for instance, that someone transitioning from male to female have to go through. One of the biggest ones has to do with puberty. And so somebody who was assigned male at birth goes through male puberty, and testosterone does all sorts of things to the body that, if you're actually a woman inside, are very uncomfortable. We're talking about having a deeper voice, facial hair, body hair, having taller stature, having broader hands, wider shoulders. And again, this is genetics, will play into this, but for somebody who's transgender and they realize after puberty that this is what's going on with them, they can start hormone therapy to begin to feminize more, but there are certain things that will not change. Their voice will not change. Their height will not change. They have to, even though their facial hair and body hair will slow down in growth, they have to get very painful laser hair removal and electrolysis to remove this hair. So medically transitioning in that sense can be very, very challenging. For those who transition from female to male, when they go through female puberty, they will oftentimes develop breasts, have a more curvy sort of figure. The fat distribution is more feminine. And so once they go through puberty, eventually, if they realize that they are actually male, they can start hormone therapy. Testosterone can lower their voice and help them grow facial hair. There's some other things that can happen through it. So when it comes to somebody who is transitioning to male, after a couple of years on testosterone therapy, a lot of times they will have a deep voice and facial hair, and a lot of people won't know. Whereas for somebody who's transitioning to female, depending on their genetics and how much male puberty sort of kicked them in the gut, a lot of times there may be no way for them to ever be able to not, in some way or another, not appear as a woman.
Do you feel that it's, even within the transgender realm, that it is more of a struggle as far as people understanding or acceptance for if it is a man transitioning to female or a female transitioning to male?
That's a wonderful question, because there is a lot of social theory and gender studies conversations happening around this. Why is it that those who are transitioning to female, why is it that they're getting this sort of spotlight and scrutiny? They're the ones that are being most attacked when it comes to, you can't use the bathrooms. That's something that, when we really think about it, I think there's still what I call the shaming of the feminine that still exists in our society. And so somebody who's born genetically as a male, transitioning to female, sometimes, people, why would you give up male privilege? This is so strange. Whereas somebody transitioning from female to male, a lot of my clients who are transgender men, they are amazed by how differently they're treated as men as opposed to how they were treated as women. They're like, wow, this really exists. I'm being respected more now. I'm being looked in the eye. I'm being asked my opinion. And so people who are transgender have this very interesting social experiment of seeing what it's like to have been one gender and transition to the other. So the transgender females on the other side, they then are now being seen as women, and they're like, I am now that I'm being treated as a woman, I have lost certain male privileges, and that can be on both sides. It can be a bit of a painful experience at times, and something they really have to get used to.
Dara, you spoke a little bit about this when you shared about, the first step in this process is really dealing with any repressed aspects of the transgender experience. Can you talk a little bit about how you support your clients in therapy?
Oh, yes. Well, I have noticed that there's a difference between the generations. So I do have clients who are in their 60s who are talking about whether or not they should transition. And I have clients who are younger, who are in their 20s and 30s. And so there's this divide between those who are pre-internet and those who are post-internet. So those who are pre-internet are those who are, like I said, who are older, maybe in their 50s and 60s. And there's a specific approach we have to take for them because, like I said, they've already made a lot of commitments and decisions in their life, such as getting married, having kids, having a certain career, and living this life as this gender they really aren't. That can take a lot of unraveling and having to make some really difficult decisions about, what sort of risks am I willing to take? What might I end up having to sacrifice? Those who are younger, and again, of course, it depends on the person. If they haven't yet made a lot of big life decisions yet, you still kind of catch them early in their life. For them, of course, they still have fears about transitioning, about whether or not they're going to disappoint their parents. How is society going to end up treating them if they do transition? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done around self-care. There's a lot of work about having to recognize if they have any inner hatred towards themselves for being transgender. There's helping them find support, either in person or if they don't have, if they live someplace where there's not in-person support, trying to find that online. I think it's really important to make sure that that person's able to self-define their gender identity in their own words so that they can then have ownership of that. And so those are just a few of the ways that I try to support my clients.
It sounds like quite a process, a lot of the inner process that has to really be worked through before the external process of actually living it out in the world.
Yeah, helping them build up resilience is extremely important.
Dara, what are some of the best ways that you would suggest friends and family support their loved ones who are experiencing this?
I would say that one of the first things you can do is believe the person who is telling you this. More than likely, they have wrestled with how should they tell you, when should they tell you. The first number one fear they have is that you might reject them. And so a lot of my clients have felt great comfort if the person they're talking to immediately says, first, let me just let you know I love you no matter what. I can't tell you how many times I hear that, as it almost seems like it's good. It's a knee-jerk reaction that most family members and loved ones have, is they know that that person is scared to death to talk to them about this. So immediately letting them know, I care about you. I want you to know that we're going to get through this together. So there may be a lot of questions that you have. There may be a lot of fears that you have. There may be some loss that you experience where you thought, the person was one gender and now they're another. So I would suggest, just like any big change that happens in a relationship, it takes communication, it takes time, it takes patience. So just like anything else difficult that needs to be talked about, try to create as safe of a space as possible for that person to be able to feel like they can open up to you.
Dara, I have a few questions from listeners that I wanted to run by you and kind of do a quick Q&A. Are you up for that?
I'm ready. Yes.
Okay. So the first one is, when do you know it's time to talk to your child about transitioning? Do I need to prepare my family, friends, and her school? How do I go about this?
So it sounds like the person who's asked this question perhaps has already had a child who has expressed to their parents that the child might not use the words, Mom, Dad, I'm transgender. They might, depending on their level of awareness about this. But it sounds like this person has a child who already has expressed the fact that they're very uncomfortable with their assigned gender at birth. And so there are certain steps that can be taken so that this isn't something that's rushed into, because I think that's important not only for the parents, but for the child as well. Again, setting that stage for that child to be able to talk about this openly is paramount. Trying to find a therapist who specializes in gender therapy and who works with kids. I know that can sometimes be like finding a needle in a haystack, but I would really strongly suggest that somebody try to find somebody who they can work with, because that means that therapist already has experience doing this. And a lot of times that therapist will know how to help the family and the child navigate through the school system. How do you end up, how do you approach the school about this? And what are different things to make sure are in their folders? So, and what is it that needs to be kept private and confidential? All those kind of things. A gender therapist who works with children can be really, really crucial in that. Also being sure that your child's pediatrician is somebody who is able to work with your child on this. And so we're still in a place right now where that might not be, by coincidence that your pediatrician just happens to be very aware of how to work with kids who are transgender. So it is something where you do need to have that conversation with your pediatrician and feel out where they are. If your pediatrician is willing to teach themselves and learn more about this, then that might be okay. You might be comfortable with that. If it seems like they're really uncomfortable, you might actually even have to try to find another pediatrician, because they're going to be a crucial part of the child's transition as they go forward.
Okay, so the next question is, if you see signs that your child prefers the other gender, toys, playing male or female superheroes or male or female roles, their clothing, opposite sex friends, but they also show some characteristics of being their born gender, should you continue to wait and see, or how do you move forward with this?
Mm-hmm. I hear this question a lot. I'm really glad you asked it. So nowadays, there are a lot more kids who are expressing what could be seen as cross-gender behavior. But if you really look at it, for instance, for a long time now, girls, including myself, when I was young, I was called a tomboy. I wore just because of what clothes I wore, what toys I played with, and I liked to hang out with the boys. For myself, it did not mean that I actually was a boy. And even though I got teased for it to a certain extent, it still is something that is more generally accepted in our society. It's a little harder for boys. Boys who say that they have an interest in wearing dresses or playing with more girl kind of toys, wanting to play with their female friends, that is still seen as being very outside the norm and concerning. And so there are a lot more parents now out there who are encouraging their children, including boys, to just like what you like, wear what you wear, and just let that just sort of flow and see what happens. Difference is if that child is expressing very specifically that, for one, there's something about their body that they are very uncomfortable with, or that they hate, or, what's this doing here? That is more of an indication there might be something deeper going on. Also, if they specifically say, why can't I stand in the line with the boys? Or, why can't I do what they're doing? I'm a boy, even though you're looking at your kid and you're like, oh, no, you're not a boy, you're a girl. That gives you that awareness that there's a deeper gender discomfort that's going on. And that's where you would then want to, like we just talked about, try to find a gender therapist or talk to your pediatrician and do some research online about the fact that this might be going on.
Okay, and then our last question is, as parents, we want to protect our child and have considered moving to a community that may be more open and supportive. Do you feel this is a positive thing to do, or is this worse, as we would be leaving behind a support network if they chose to support us, and also uprooting our child?
That's first of all, it definitely saddens me to know that that is something that's going on. And I've heard this from other parents as well who live in communities where being a kid who's transgender is not as welcomed. And so I think when it comes down to it, it really is having to weigh out the pros and the cons of your child's future, and having to really figure out, here's what we'd be missing, like you said, support system and familiarity of the area. And then really trying to recognize, at this point, how much is this affecting my child negatively? Is their literal safety in jeopardy? Are they being bullied and ridiculed at school? And things like that. If it turns out that you're even afraid for your child's safety, I could see how that would then weigh into the decision, and it would supersede the other different options you're weighing out. If it's something where you feel like it's possible that with more education for the people in your child's life, and maybe at the school system, with more understanding, with more exposure to what it means to be transgender, that there's room for growth, then I could see how somebody would maybe choose to stay a little longer and continue to see maybe this is something that we can actually help. And it takes a lot of resiliency for a family to make a decision together. Like, we need to do this to be able to help the future children who are transgender. For instance, Jazz Jennings is a very famous teenager who's transgender. And if you watch her show, you can see how difficult and exhausting it can be at times for her family to know that they're part of this transgender movement. They are really trying to make change, and to see their daughter have to be exposed at times to hatred and threats. It can be really painful, but she's very strong in the fact that she said, I know I'm saving lives. I know I'm saving teenager and kids' lives by going out there and being proud of who I am. And so it's, I think in conclusion, it's a family decision, and it's something that perhaps can be decided incrementally over time.
Dara, if someone is listening right now who is, really struggling with their gender, or maybe it's even a loved one who is struggling with this regarding their loved one, what are some words of wisdom that you would have to offer them?
I would say that being able to find some answers for yourself really is important. And so being able to reach out, and like I said, the internet, there's such a huge difference now as there was before, because at your fingertips, you can get so much information about asking questions about your gender, feeling like there's others who are like you. And so, not to toot my own horn, but I do have a lot of resources.
You do. You do.
Which I can mention at the end, and also if you want to provide links for that as well. But, I have videos that are specifically, and articles that are specifically for those who are questioning their gender. That's what my entire book is about, is for those who are questioning their gender. There's information out there for your loved ones. For those who are transgender, you might have like your parents or your spouse or your partner. How can they be able to help you go through this? And really, I think it's about getting information and educating yourself. And then at the same time, recognizing that there are others out there like you. That's a huge step, so that you don't feel alone in this process. And then finding out, once you do figure out better what's going on, what are the possibilities? What is it that you can do to help yourself feel more comfortable in your own skin?
Dara, what are some of your favorite resources in this area? And this might also naturally segue into, the best way to contact you and any upcoming projects or events that listeners may be able to participate in.
Sure. So for myself, I have a website that you can find at Hoffman-Fox.com. So I'm in the process in the next couple months. I'm going to revamp my website, but it's still really nice.
It is. It's a great website.
Thank you. If you go to it right now, it's a little over 3 years worth of information that, like I said, it goes all the way from those who are questioning their gender identity to those who already have figured it out, but they want to know, they have questions about transitioning. There's guest blog posts from people who are spouses, from parents, things like that. And so through there, you can find also my YouTube channel. So for those who are more for those who like watching videos more than others, that would be a useful way. I have a Facebook page, and it's called Conversations with a Gender Therapist, and I post on that very frequently. And there's a lot of conversation, as I had hoped, by naming it that, on the page from people who are transgender, from mental health practitioners, from parents and spouses. So people really do conversate about the different things that I post. And so the thing I really want to make sure I put out there is that the information and resources that I'm sharing, I want to be sure that it really connects with those who are transgender. But like I said, I need the world to be able to shift so that it's a welcoming place for those who are transgender. So if you feel really strongly about this as well, if something about today's episode, touches something in you, whether it's because for yourself, someone you love, or you just have a feeling that this is a cause that you're really interested in, really just start educating yourself and then start speaking up. You can do it even on social media when you see something happen in the news. And just here and there, just mention something that shows that you are supportive and you want to correct somebody on myths that they believe. Every single person out there who can do a little something to help is going to make the whole world change. And something else I wanted to offer your audience specifically is a coupon for 20% off of my book. And the book, again, is called You and Your Gender Identity, A Guide to Discovery. You can take a look and see what the book is about going to my website. This is a different website, and it's discoveryourgenderidentity.com. And if you decide you want to get the book, when you're in the checkout section, the coupon code is going to be DEPTH, since the podcast is Women in Depth. So it's DEPTH. And again, that's for 20% off the book.
Thank you so much, Dara. And I will be sure to include links to all of the resources that you mentioned, along with the coupon code DEPTH in the show notes.
Well, Lourdes, thank you again. Like I said, every time I have a chance to speak to a wider audience, and even if there's just one person out there who's learned something new and is able to use that as a way to help somebody who's transgender, or to even teach somebody else about what it means, then I feel like my mission is being met.
Thank you so much, Dara. I know that the information and the insights that you shared today will resonate with many of our listeners, and it'll be really meaningful and helpful to those who struggle with this, and for those who have a loved one who's experiencing this as well. So you definitely are accomplishing your mission. Thank you so much.
That's great. So glad to hear that. Thank you.
Take care. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Dara. For me, one of the things that stood out is that gender identity is not something that is simple to define, that it occurs on a continuum, and that even for the person who's experiencing it, there is a process that they go through to arrive at really knowing who they are. It was also really helpful to hear Dara's suggestions for supporting loved ones who are experiencing this. For show notes to today's episode, please visit www.lourdesviado.com/women in depth. And there will also be links to all the resources that Dara mentioned, including the 20% off code that she provided for her book, You and Your Gender Identity, A Guide to Discovery. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. See you next time. Take care.